The stone floor of the servants' quarters had long since leached all warmth from Celeste's bones, but she had learned years ago to stop shivering. Shivering drew attention, and attention in the Nightshade household was never the kind that brought comfort. She pressed her palm flat against the rough wool of her sleeping pallet, focusing on the texture rather than the churning in her stomach that had plagued her for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks since the traveling soldier had passed through. 3 weeks since she had allowed herself one night, just one, of pretending she was someone worthy of tenderness. Foolish, her wolf whispered, the voice so faint after years of suppression that Celeste sometimes wondered if she imagined it entirely. We were foolish to think we could have even that. She pressed her other hand to her still flat belly, though she knew the gesture was useless. The changes were happening inside, invisible, but undeniable. Her monthly blood had not come. Her breasts ached with a tenderness that had nothing to do with the bruises from last week's beating. And beneath it all, thrumming like a second heartbeat she could barely perceive, was the impossible flutter of new life. Wolf shifter pups grew fast. What took humans 9 months took their kind barely 5, and already the tiny spark inside her was making itself known. A pup. She was carrying a pup, and if anyone discovered it, she would die. Not quickly. Victor had never been quick about anything that brought him pleasure, but thoroughly. He would make an example of her, the servant who dared to breed without permission, the disgraced sister who should have been grateful he let her live at all. The memory of their father's funeral surfaced unbidden. Celeste had been 16, still believing that blood meant something, that the brother who had pushed her on the garden swings as a child would protect her now that their father was gone, and their mother was fading. She remembered the exact moment that belief had shattered, Victor's hand closing around her wrist as the mourners departed, his voice low and pleasant as he explained that their father's debts left nothing for her dowry, but that the Thornwood family was willing to take her as a bonded servant in exchange for forgiving what the estate owed them. "You understand?" Victor had said, still smiling, "that this is the only way to preserve the Nightshade name. One of us must sacrifice, and it certainly won't be me." She had been too shocked to fight. By the time she found her voice, the documents were signed, and she learned that a bonded servant had no voice at all. 10 years. 10 years of scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots, and pretending she couldn't feel her wolf slowly withering inside her, forbidden to shift, forbidden to run, forbidden to be anything other than hands and silence. When the Thornwood patriarch died and Victor generously purchased her bond to keep her close, she had understood it for what it was. Not mercy, but ownership, the final confirmation that her brother saw her as property rather than pack. And now she carried a pup, and the wolf that had nearly vanished entirely was stirring with something that felt terrifyingly like hope. "We must protect," the wolf whispered, "whatever it costs. We must protect the pup." The door to the servants' quarters slammed open. Celeste was on her feet before the sound finished echoing, years of training overriding the exhaustion that dragged at her limbs. She pressed her back to the wall and lowered her eyes, making herself as small and unremarkable as possible, but she already knew it was too late. Victor never came to the servants' quarters himself. Victor summoned. His boots clicked against the stone as he crossed the threshold, and the 3 other servants who shared Celeste's space scrambled to bow, pressing their foreheads to the ground in desperate supplication. Celeste remained standing, her wolf too weak to complete the traditional submission, her human heart too tired to pretend she felt it. Victor stopped directly in front of her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, handsome in the way of men who had never known hardship, features soft with good living, hands unscarred by labor. Their mother's eyes looked out from his face, gray-green and sharp, but where their mother's gaze had held warmth, Victor's held only calculation. "Sister," he said, and the word dripped with false affection. "You've been keeping secrets from me." Her heart stopped. She was certain of it. Her heart stopped beating entirely for one endless moment before lurching back into desperate rhythm. "I don't know what you mean, my lord." "My lord." He laughed, a short bark of sound that made the servants on the floor flinch. "After all this time, you still call me lord rather than brother. I suppose that's appropriate, given our positions." He reached out, almost gentle, and brushed a strand of dark hair from her face. "The healers talk, you know. The ones who attend the servants. They gossip like old women, discussing symptoms and ailments with anyone who asks the right questions." Celesta's hand moved involuntarily toward her belly before she forced it back to her side. Victor's eyes tracked the movement, and his smile widened. "3 weeks without bleeding," he said softly. "Morning sickness carefully hidden in the hours before dawn, and a scent." He leaned closer, inhaling deeply, and his pupils dilated. "That any alpha would recognize. You're breeding, Celeste. After all my warnings about the disgrace it would bring, after all my rules about keeping yourself untouched, you spread your legs for some common wolf and got yourself pupped. Please." The word escaped before she could stop it. "Victor, please. I'll leave. I'll go somewhere no one knows us. I'll never bring shame to the Nightshade name, I swear." "Shame?" He laughed again, longer this time, genuinely amused. "Oh, sweet sister, you misunderstand me completely. I'm not angry." He circled her slowly, and she had to fight every instinct to keep from turning with him, to keep from showing her back to a predator who had proven again and again that he would strike at weakness. "I'm delighted." The word made no sense. She replayed it in her mind, searching for the trap, the cruelty hidden beneath. "You see," Victor continued, "I've known for years that our family bloodline was more valuable than anyone realized. Father was a fool who never investigated Mother's heritage properly, but I am not Father." He stopped in front of her again, close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath, the expensive tobacco that clung to his clothes. "Mother was a moonfire, the last surviving daughter of the dynasty everyone believes extinct, and that makes you, dear sister, the sole carrier of moonfire blood in existence." The world tilted. Celeste's knees buckled, and only the wall at her back kept her upright. Moonfire, the legendary dynasty that had once ruled the Eastern Territories, whose wolves were said to carry the light of the moon itself in their veins. They had been destroyed in the Great Purge 15 years ago. Every man, woman, and child hunted down and slaughtered on the orders of the old Alpha King, who feared their power. "You're lying," she whispered. "I assure you, I'm not. I've had the blood work confirmed by 3 separate sources. Mother's family hid their survivors well, but paper trails exist for those willing to pay for them." Victor's smile was sharp enough to cut. "I've known for years, of course, but knowing isn't selling. Buyers want proof the blood breed's true. Documentation alone isn't enough for the kind of money we're talking about. I needed you to produce an heir first, to prove the line was viable." His eyes glittered with cold satisfaction. "And now you've done exactly that, all on your own. Do you have any idea what collectors will pay for verified moonfire blood? The academics who want to study it? The nobles who want to breed it into their lines? The power-hungry alphas who believe it will strengthen their packs? Collectors." The word hit her like a physical blow. "You're going to sell me," she said, and her voice came out hollow, scraped empty of everything except understanding. "No, no. You've been a useful servant. I'd hate to lose you." Victor's fingers closed around her chin, forcing her face up until she had no choice but to meet his eyes. "I'm going to sell the pup. A purebred moonfire child, born of a documented carrier, with whatever common wolf's traits it inherited from its father to be trained out of it. Do you have any idea what that's worth?" "I've already found a buyer. Lord Varric has offered enough gold to purchase a small territory outright. He has particular interests in rare bloodlines." Celeste's wolf, dormant and dying for so many years, suddenly erupted with a fury that made her vision flash silver at the edges. No. The word wasn't spoken, it was felt. A primal rejection that reverberated through every fiber of her being. Her wolf had accepted so much, the beatings, the bondage, the slow starvation of being forbidden to shift or run or hunt. But this threat to the life growing inside her, was beyond acceptance. Victor saw something change in her expression and stepped back quickly, his own wolf rising in response to the sudden threat. "The transaction happens tomorrow night," he said, and his voice had lost some of its amused confidence. "Lord Varek will take possession of you until the pup is born. After that, you'll be returned to me, and we'll discuss whether this arrangement will be repeated." He straightened his jacket, composing himself. "Guards will be posted at all doors. Don't do anything stupid, sister. You have nowhere to go, and no one who would help you even if you did." He turned and walked out, his boots echoing against the stone, and the door slammed shut behind him with terrible finality. Celeste stood frozen for what felt like hours, though it could only have been minutes. The other servants remained pressed to the ground, none of them daring to move until she did, and she could feel their fear like a physical presence in the room. They were afraid of Victor, yes, but now they were also afraid of her, of what she apparently was, of what she carried, of what Victor's interest in her might mean for anyone who got too close. She looked down at her belly, still flat beneath the rough servant's dress. "Run," her wolf whispered, and the voice was stronger now than it had been in years, fed by desperation and the primal need to protect. "We must run. Now. Tonight." "There are guards," Celeste thought back. "He said there are guards at all doors." "Then we don't use doors." The memory surfaced slowly. A gap in the kitchen store's wall, hidden behind stacked crates, where the mortar had crumbled and never been repaired. She had discovered it years ago, during one of the rare nights she'd been assigned to inventory duty. It was barely wide enough for a child to slip through, but she was thin. Years of servants' rations had ensured that, and desperation could make small spaces larger. She waited. She waited until the house quieted, until Victor's footsteps retreated to his chambers, until the guards settled into the bored routine of men expecting no trouble. She waited until the moon rose high enough to light the service corridors, and then she moved, slipping through shadows that she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. The kitchen was empty, the fires banked low for the night. Celeste crossed to the storage room with her heart slamming against her ribs, certain that at any moment someone would appear and drag her back to Victor's smiling justice. Her hands shook as she shifted the crates, each small scrape of wood against stone impossibly loud in the silence. The gap was still there, exactly as she remembered it. She stripped off her servant's dress and bundled it tightly, shoving it through the gap first. The night air that touched her bare skin was brutal, cold enough to make her gasp. But she forced herself forward, pressing her shoulders through the narrow opening, scraping skin against rough stone as she wriggled toward freedom. For one terrible moment she stuck. Her hips caught against the edges of the gap, and panic clawed at her throat, convinced that this was where she would die, trapped half in and half out of her prison while Victor's guards found her and... She twisted sharply, pain lancing through her side, and suddenly she was through, tumbling into fresh snow that burned against her bare skin. She lay there gasping, staring up at the stars, feeling the cold seep into her bones with lethal patience. "Move," her wolf commanded. "Move or die. We must reach the Alpha King's encampment. 3 days' journey. We will not make it if we stop. The Alpha King. Corvus Blackwood, the monster who ruled the southern territories and had conquered the north, now holding court in a mobile war camp that moved with the seasons. Rumors said he was brutal, merciless, that he had killed 3 challengers in the last year alone and displayed their pelts as warnings, But rumors also said he protected those who belonged to him with a ferocity that bordered on madness, that even the lowliest servant in his camp was safer than a lord in any other territory. If she could reach him, if she could somehow convince him to let her stay, Victor couldn't touch her. Not even her brother was mad enough to challenge the Alpha King's authority. Celeste pulled her dress back on with numb fingers and began to walk. The first night was endless. Snow swallowed her up to the knees, and the cold was a living thing that wrapped around her bones and squeezed. She had no coat, no shoes meant for travel, no supplies beyond the small knife she always kept hidden in her bodice. She walked until her legs gave out, slept in the hollow of a frozen tree, and woke when dawn painted the sky gray to find that her fingers had turned an alarming shade of white. The second night was worse. The temperature dropped further, and ice formed on her eyelashes, in her hair, on the fabric of her dress until it crackled when she moved. She stumbled often, catching herself on tree branches that scratched her palms bloody, and each time it took longer to rise. Her wolf's voice grew fainter, the desperate urgency giving way to something that sounded almost like acceptance. "You're dying," Celeste thought, and she wasn't sure which of them she was addressing. "We are both dying," her wolf replied. "But the pup still lives." Move. Asterisk. She moved. She moved until her vision blurred, and the forest became a smear of white and dark gray, until she could no longer feel her feet touching the ground, until she was convinced she was no longer walking, but floating, the cold finally merciful enough to carry her. The scent hit her first. Wood smoke, leather, the musk of wolves, and the sharp iron tang of weapons being forged. She was so far gone that she couldn't identify what the smells meant, only that they promised warmth. And warmth meant survival. The ground rose beneath her feet, and she realized dimly that she was climbing a hill, that there were shapes ahead of her. Tents. Her fading mind supplied. Military tents arranged in precise rows, torches flickering between them like earthbound stars. She had reached the encampment. She tried to call out, to announce her presence, but her throat was frozen closed. All she could manage was a whisper, a desperate exhale of breath that formed crystals in the air and fell without sound. The sentry found her 3 steps later. He shouted something she couldn't understand, and suddenly there were hands on her, voices overlapping in urgent confusion, and the blessedly overwhelming sensation of warmth. Warmth. Finally warmth, against her frozen skin. She was lifted. She couldn't feel the arms that carried her, but she knew she was no longer on the ground, and the world became a blur of torchlight and worried faces, and somewhere, distantly, a voice that cut through all the others with sharp authority. "Bring her to my tent. Now." Then everything went dark. She woke in stages, warmth returning to her body in painful waves that made her gasp and flinch. Furs surrounded her, thick, soft furs that smelled of pine and something deeper, something her wolf stirred at with sudden, inexplicable interest. A fire crackled nearby, close enough that she could feel its heat on the side of her face. And someone was tending her wounds. Gentle hands wrapped bandages around her frostbitten fingers, so careful that the pain barely registered. Celeste forced her eyes open, her vision swimming before slowly focusing on the figure beside her. He was dressed simply, a soldier's clothes, plain and practical, though they stretched across shoulders broader than any she had seen. His hair was dark and fell across his forehead in an unruly wave, and his face was the kind of handsome that came from hard living rather than easy luxury, a jaw that could have been carved from granite, a nose that had been broken at least once, a mouth pressed into a line of concentration as he worked. Then he looked up, and their eyes met, gray. His eyes were gray like storm clouds, like iron, like the winter sky she had nearly died beneath. But as she watched, threads of gold crept through the gray, spreading like sunrise through fog, and his pupils dilated until barely any color remained at all. A growl rumbled from his chest, low and resonant, and Celeste felt it in her bones. Her wolf, dormant, dying, barely a whisper for years, suddenly surged awake with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. Heat spread from her core outward, liquid and consuming, pooling in places she had never felt warmth before, and a word echoed through her mind with absolute, irrefutable certainty. Mate. The growl deepened, vibrating through the air between them like a living thing, and Celeste watched in frozen fascination as the man's hands, those gentle hands that had been wrapping her wounds with such careful precision, began to tremble. His knuckles went white where they gripped the edge of the cot, the wood creaking in protest, and she could see the tendons standing out in his forearms as he fought against something she didn't understand. No, that was a lie. She understood perfectly. Mate. Her wolf howled again, the sound so loud inside her skull that she was certain he must hear it. Ours. He is ours. We have waited so long, suffered so much, and he is finally here. But that was impossible. That was utterly, devastatingly impossible, because she was pregnant with another wolf's child, because she was a runaway servant with nothing to offer, because she was Moonfire, hunted, valuable, dangerous, and he was a common soldier who happened to have kind hands and storm-gray eyes that were rapidly being consumed by gold. You, he breathed, and his voice was rough, scraped raw like he'd been screaming for hours. He said her name without knowing it, the syllables spilling from his lips on an exhale. You're? He stopped himself. She watched the effort it cost him, the way his jaw clenched until the muscles jumped, the way he forced himself to release the cot and step back. One step, then two, until his back pressed against the canvas wall of the tent. Distance. He was putting distance between them, and some part of her wanted to scream at him to come back, to close the gap, to what? Her human mind demanded savagely. To claim you? To mark you? You don't even know his name, and you're carrying another wolf's pup, and you've been a servant for 10 years. You don't get mates. You don't get happy endings. You get survival, if you're lucky. And right now, survival means keeping your head down and your mouth shut. But her wolf wouldn't be silenced. Her wolf, which had been dying by inches for a decade, was suddenly more alive than Celeste had ever felt her, and she was drinking in the man's scent like water after drought, cedar and thunderstorms and something darker beneath. Something wild and commanding that made Celeste's skin prickle with awareness. You're awake, he said finally, and she could hear the control he was exerting over his voice, the careful neutrality that cost him everything. Healer Mira said you might not wake at all, frostbite on your fingers and toes, early stages of hypothermia, dehydration. His eyes dropped to her belly before snapping back to her face. And you're pregnant. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an accusation either, though Celeste braced herself for one. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered in that rough voice that made her wolf keen with longing. Yes, she said, and was surprised to find that her voice worked at all. It came out hoarse, cracked, barely a whisper, but it came out. 3 weeks along, maybe 4. I'm not certain. Something flickered in his expression, pain, perhaps, or acceptance, or something she couldn't name, and then it was gone, smoothed away behind a mask of careful calm. The pup's father, he said. Is he gone? The word was sharper than she intended. A traveling soldier who passed through my master's territory. One night. He left at dawn, and I never saw him again. Master. She saw the word hit him like a physical blow, saw his nostrils flare and his eyes flash gold again before he wrestled himself back under control. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, looked at the bruises on her arms, faded now but still visible, at the calluses on her palms that spoke of years of hard labor, at the hollows in her cheeks that came from never quite getting enough to eat. "You're a servant," he said, and there was something dangerous in his voice now, something that made her wolf want to roll over and bare her throat in submission. "A bonded servant." "I was?" Celeste struggled to sit up, and he moved forward instinctively to help her before catching himself and stopping mid-step. "I ran. 2 nights ago. My master. My brother." The words caught in her throat. "He was going to sell my pup. To a collector of rare bloodlines." The growl that ripped from his chest was nothing like the rumble from before. This was a sound of pure, primal rage, so deep and resonant that the tent poles trembled and the fire seemed to cower in its pit. His eyes went completely gold, no gray remaining at all, and for a heartbeat Celeste saw the wolf beneath the man's skin, massive, powerful, utterly lethal. She should have been terrified. Every instinct honed by 10 years of abuse screamed at her to cower, to make herself small, to placate the angry alpha before he turned that rage on her. Instead, she felt safe. "He would never hurt us," her wolf said with absolute certainty. "He is ours, and we are his, and he would tear apart the world before allowing harm to touch us." "What is your brother's name?" The words came out as a snarl, barely human. "Where is his territory? I will—" "No." Celeste surprised herself with the force of the word. "No. He has guards, resources, allies. You're a soldier. You can't just—" She stopped, because he was laughing. It wasn't a pleasant laugh. It was dark and bitter, and edged with something that sounded almost like hysteria, but it transformed his face, revealing a younger man beneath the hard lines and warrior's discipline. "A soldier," he repeated, shaking his head. "Yes, I suppose I am, at the moment." He drew a deep breath, visibly forcing himself to calm, and when he spoke again his voice was almost normal. "My name is Corvus. I'm going to bring you food and water, and you're going to eat until you can't take another bite. And then you're going to sleep in a real bed with real furs instead of frozen ground. We'll discuss your brother later. Right now, the only thing that matters is getting you healthy." Corvus. The name sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Corvus," her wolf repeated, savoring each syllable. "Our mate's name is Corvus." He moved toward the tent flap, and Celeste's hand shot out before she could stop it, her fingers closing around his wrist. The contact was electric. Heat surged through her palm and raced up her arm, settling in her chest like a second heartbeat. And she saw him shudder, saw his eyes fall closed for a single, vulnerable moment. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. I'm no one. Less than no one. I'm a runaway servant carrying another wolf's pup, and I stumbled into your camp half dead. Why would you—" "Because you're mine," he said, and the words were barely audible, forced through clenched teeth like they cost him everything to say. "Because my wolf has been waiting for you since the day I was born, and I have spent 32 years wondering if the bond was even real, or if I was simply destined to be alone. And then you appeared at the edge of my camp with ice in your hair and a heartbeat in your belly that isn't mine, and none of it matters." He opened his eyes, and she drowned in gold. "You're mine. The pup is yours, which makes it mine too. And I will burn down every territory between here and the southern sea before I let anyone take either of you from me." Then he pulled free of her grip, gently, so gently, despite the tremor in his hands, and ducked out of the tent before she could find words to respond. Celeste stared at the empty space where he had been, her heart pounding, her wolf howling with triumph, her human mind scrambling to make sense of what had just happened. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the distant flutter of her pup's heartbeat, and tried to remember how to breathe. A common soldier, she had thought. Just a common soldier with kind hands. But no common soldier spoke like that. No common soldier commanded that kind of power, wore that kind of authority like a second skin, made promises of destruction with the casual certainty of someone who could actually deliver them. What have I stumbled into? She wondered, and her wolf's only answer was a sound of deep, contented satisfaction. The days that followed were strange and disorienting, like waking from a long nightmare only to find herself in a dream she didn't quite believe. Corvus brought her food, far more food than any soldier's rations could account for. Rich stews thick with meat and root vegetables, fresh bread that was still warm from the ovens, cheese and dried fruit and honey that made her weep because she hadn't tasted honey since she was 16 years old, before Victor had stripped everything sweet from her life. He sat outside her tent while she ate, never entering unless she called for him, telling her stories about battles he had fought and foreign lands he had seen. His voice was low and steady, a rumble that her wolf found impossibly soothing, and she found herself listening not just to the words, but to the cadence beneath them, the rhythm of a man who had lived hard and fought harder, who had seen terrible things and somehow emerged with his soul intact. On the third night, when she was strong enough to sit up without trembling, she pushed aside the tent flap and found him exactly where she knew he would be. Seated on a wooden stool with his back against a supply crate, his long legs stretched out before him, his face tilted up toward the stars. Even at rest, there was something about his posture that spoke of command, a bearing that suggested he was far more than just another soldier. "You could come inside," she said. "It's cold." He glanced at her, and even in the dim torchlight she could see the flicker of gold in his gray eyes. "You're still healing. You don't need me crowding your space." "You're not crowding, you're—" She struggled for the right word. "You're careful. You're so careful every time you're near me." "Why?" Corvus was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound of such profound weariness that it made her chest ache. "Because my wolf wants to claim you," he said bluntly. "Every second I'm near you, he's howling at me to mark you, to put my scent on you, to make sure every wolf in this camp knows you're mine, and you—" He swallowed hard. "You've spent 10 years being controlled by men who didn't give a damn what you wanted. The last thing you need is another alpha making demands of you before you've had a chance to breathe." Something cracked open in Celeste's chest. She thought of Victor, who had smiled while signing away her freedom, of the Thornwood patriarch, who had worked her until her hands bled and her wolf went silent, of every alpha she had ever known, who had seen her as property to be used, as weakness to be exploited, as nothing more than a body to command. And here was Corvus, his whole body rigid with restraint, sitting in the cold because he refused to take what his wolf demanded without her permission. "You're not like them," she said softly. "I'm exactly like them." The words were bitter. "I'm an alpha. I have all the same instincts, all the same urges. The only difference is that I choose not to act on them. I choose to wait. I choose to give you time to decide what you want, without my wolf's influence clouding your judgment." "But I don't want you to wait," her wolf whispered, and for once, her human mind agreed. Celeste stepped out of the tent and crossed the space between them. Corvus went rigid, his hands clenching on his knees, but he didn't move away. When she reached him, she did something that would have gotten her beaten in Victor's household. She reached out and touched his face. His skin was warm despite the cold, rough with stubble that rasped against her palm. He closed his eyes at the contact, and she felt the shudder that ran through him, the iron control that kept him still when every instinct screamed at him to move. "Why won't you tell me about yourself?" she asked. "I've been here 3 days, and all I know is your name and that you're a soldier. Where's your pack? Your family? Why are you in a war camp in the middle of nowhere?" He opened his eyes, and she saw something flicker behind the gold. Pain, old and deep, and carefully buried. My pack is complicated, he said. My family is complicated, and I'm in this camp because... He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Because I needed to get away from responsibilities for a while. To remember who I was before everything became about duty. He looked away from her, his jaw tightening, before the weight of command made it impossible to be anything but the role I'm expected to play. It wasn't the whole truth. She could feel it, could sense the gaps in his words where secrets lurked. But she also understood secrets, understood the need to hold parts of yourself back until trust had been earned. Your story is yours to give when you're ready, she said, echoing words she had heard him speak on the first night. That's what you told me, remember? When I asked why you didn't demand answers about my past. His eyes widened slightly, and then his mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. Using my own words against me. Clever. I'm a fast learner. She pulled her hand back reluctantly, already missing the warmth of his skin. And I'm learning that you're not the monster I expected to find in an alpha. That's unsettling, but also good. I'm not sure I deserve that distinction, Corvus said quietly, but I'm grateful you see me that way. They sat in silence after that, shoulder to shoulder against the cold, watching the stars wheel overhead. And somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, a sound of pure, wild joy that made Celeste's wolf stir with answering longing. For the first time in 10 years, she let herself imagine that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The problem started on the 5th day. Celeste had grown strong enough to walk short distances, and Corvus had given her permission to explore the camp as long as she stayed within sight of his tent. She was returning from a trip to the healers, who had pronounced her recovery remarkable and the pup's heartbeat strong, when she heard voices around the corner of a supply wagon. Don't understand why he's keeping her around. She's nobody. Worse than nobody. A pregnant stray who stumbled in from the wilderness. Celeste froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. Word is she's a runaway servant. A second voice, lower and meaner. Carrying some random wolf's pup. The commander must be touched in the head, wasting resources on a creature like that. Maybe he just wants a warm body in his bed. You know how alphas are. They'll rut anything willing. Laughter, coarse and cruel, and Celeste's wolf snarled with fury even as her human self shrank back against the wagon's wheel. She should leave. She should walk away and pretend she hadn't heard. The way she had learned to ignore the whispers in Victor's household. But then a third voice cut through the laughter like a blade. Say that again. The temperature dropped. Celeste felt it. Felt the sudden, suffocating weight of alpha dominance that pressed down on the air like a physical force. The wolves who had been speaking stumbled over each other in their rush to respond. Commander, sir, we didn't... I said. Corvus's voice was soft, almost gentle, and somehow that was more terrifying than shouting. Say that again. I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Silence. Absolute, trembling silence. Celeste peered around the edge of the wagon and saw Corvus standing before 3 soldiers, his posture relaxed, his hands loose at his sides. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He wasn't even raising his voice. But the 3 wolves had dropped to their knees, their faces pressed to the frozen ground in desperate submission. She is mine, Corvus said, and the words resonated with a power that made Celeste's wolf whimper and roll over, even from a distance. The pup she carries is mine. Anyone who speaks against her speaks against me. Is that understood? Yes, Commander. The words came out as a chorus of gasps. Good. He stepped forward, and one of the wolves actually whined in terror. Sergeant Harlan, you and your friends are reassigned to latrine duty. 1 month. If I hear so much as a whisper about the lady again, I'll make it permanent. Dismissed. The wolves scrambled to their feet and fled, not even bothering to stand upright before they were running. Corvus watched them go, his expression hard as granite, and then he turned and looked directly at the spot where Celeste was hiding. Their eyes met. "You heard that?" he said. It wasn't a question. Celeste stepped out from behind the wagon, her legs shaking slightly. "I heard. I'm sorry." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, and she could see the fury still burning in his eyes, tempered now by concern. "I should have anticipated this. I should have made it clear from the beginning that you're under my protection. I... You called me yours?" He stopped. The anger drained from his face, replaced by something almost like vulnerability. Yes, I did. You told them the pup is yours." "Because it is." He said it without hesitation, without doubt. "It is, Celeste. Maybe not by blood, but in every other way that matters. You are my mate, whether you accept the bond or not, and your child will be my child. I won't let anyone tell you otherwise." Celeste stared at him. Her wolf was howling with joy, with triumph, with the desperate need to close the remaining distance between them and press against this male who had claimed them so completely. But her human heart, her scarred, cautious, terrified human heart, still struggled to believe. "You don't even know what I am," she whispered. "My brother. The reason he wanted to sell my pup. I don't care. You should. It's dangerous. If you knew, then tell me." He reached out, hesitated, and then gently took her hands in his. His fingers were warm around hers, calloused from years of sword work, impossibly gentle. "Tell me everything, and let me decide for myself whether it changes anything, because I promise you, Celeste, I promise on my wolf and my honor and every star in the sky, nothing you say will make me walk away from you." She looked at him. This man, this soldier, this mate she had never expected to find, and felt something inside her shift. Not break, not shatter. Shift, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake, settling into a new configuration that felt more stable than anything she had known before. "My name isn't really Nightshade," she said quietly. "It's Moonfire. I'm the last surviving carrier of the Moonfire bloodline, and my brother has known for years. He kept me as a servant so he could profit from my heritage when the time was right. And now, he's coming for me." She waited for the fear, for the calculation, for the realization that she was more trouble than she was worth. Instead, Corvus pulled her close and wrapped his arms around her, surrounding her with his warmth and his scent and the solid, steady beat of his heart. "Then let him come," he said against her hair. "I'll be waiting." Celeste pressed her face against his chest and let herself breathe. For one perfect crystalline moment, she allowed herself to believe that everything might be all right. That this man, this impossible, stubborn, inexplicable man, might actually be strong enough to protect her from the storm that was coming. Then reality crashed back in. "You don't understand," she said, pulling back just far enough to look up at his face. "The Moonfire bloodline isn't just rare, Corvus. It's supposed to be extinct. The royal family was slaughtered 15 years ago, every single member hunted down and killed. The Alpha King himself ordered it." Corvus's expression flickered, something complicated moving behind his eyes that she couldn't quite read. "I know the history." "Then you know what happens to anyone caught harboring Moonfire blood. Death. Not just for them, but for anyone who helped them. Anyone who knew and didn't report them." She gripped his tunic, her fingers twisting in the rough fabric. "I can't let you take that risk. I can't let you—" "Celeste." His voice was gentle but firm, cutting through her spiraling panic. "Look at me." She looked. "I know exactly what I'm risking," he said. "I've known since the moment I first scented you, since I felt the bond snap into place and recognized you as mine. Do you think I would have declared you my mate in front of half the camp if I didn't understand the consequences?" But the Alpha King? The Alpha King, Corvus said slowly, is not the monster the stories have made him. The purge of the Moonfire line. There were reasons. Political machinations that went far beyond simple bloodline rivalry. The old Alpha King ordered those deaths, and he's been dead for 8 years now. His son rules differently. Celeste shook her head. You can't know that. You're just a soldier. You can't possibly know what the king thinks or feels or... Something shifted in Corvus's face. A shadow of an expression she didn't recognize. There and gone before she could name it. Trust me, he said quietly. I know more than you might think. Before she could question that cryptic statement, a horn sounded in the distance. 3 sharp blasts that made Corvus's head snap up, his body going rigid with sudden tension. What is it? Celeste asked, her heart immediately hammering against her ribs. Visitors approaching the camp, official ones. He released her and stepped back, his hand dropping to the sword at his hip in an unconscious gesture of readiness. Stay in the tent. Don't come out, no matter what you hear. Corvus, promise me. The urgency in his voice brooked no argument. Celeste nodded, and Corvus disappeared through the tent flap without another word, leaving her alone with her fear and the growing certainty that her brief moment of peace had just shattered beyond repair. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the faint, insistent flutter that had only started in the past week. Her pup was restless, responding to her distress with a restless stirring that both comforted and terrified her. I'm sorry, little one, she whispered. I'm so sorry I brought you into this world. Through the canvas walls of the tent, she could hear the sounds of the camp transforming, the organized chaos of soldiers preparing for an inspection, commands being barked, feet pounding against frozen ground, and underneath it all, a low murmur of voices that grew steadily louder as the visitors drew closer. Then she heard it. A voice she would have recognized anywhere, in any crowd, across any distance. A voice that had haunted her nightmares for 10 years and followed her across frozen wastes and through endless, desperate miles. Victor. Victor was here. Celeste's legs gave out. She sank to her knees on the fur-covered floor, her hand pressed to her mouth to stifle the sound of her breathing. Her wolf, so recently awakened, cowered at the back of her mind, whimpering with the memory of pain and fear and helpless, burning rage. No, 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 no. It was too soon. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. I'm looking for a woman. Victor's voice carried clearly through the morning air, cultured and pleasant and utterly poisonously false. My sister, actually. Poor thing wandered off in a state of confusion. She's been unwell, you understand. The pregnancy has affected her mind. I've hired trackers to help locate her, and we followed her trail here. Such a relief to find she's been cared for by such capable hands. Celeste's hands curled into fists, her mind, as if she hadn't been perfectly clear-headed when she fled, as if she hadn't known exactly what she was running from. I have legal documents here establishing my guardianship over her and her unborn child. Servitude contracts from our father's time, completely legitimate. I simply want to bring her home, ensure she receives proper care. The words blurred together into a drone of lies, each one a careful construction designed to make Victor seem like the concerned brother, and Celeste seem like the unstable runaway. She had seen him do this before. Watched him charm creditors and authorities and anyone else who might have helped her, weaving his web of falsehoods until no one would believe her truth. But she had never heard him do it in front of Corvus. She strained to hear his response, but the voices had moved away, growing fainter as the group apparently headed toward the command tent. Celeste pressed her forehead to the ground, forcing herself to breathe, to think, to plan. She could run again, slip out the back of the tent while everyone was distracted, disappear into the frozen wilderness, try to find another sanctuary somewhere, anywhere. No. She had barely survived the last attempt. And that was before Victor knew exactly where to look. He would have watchers posted, scouts tracking every path away from the camp. Running now would be walking directly into his trap. She could hide. Pray that Corvus's protection would be enough. That Victor wouldn't be able to prove his claims. That the soldiers would refuse to hand her over. But Victor had documents. Legal documents. Or at least forgeries. Good enough to pass casual inspection. And she was nobody. A pregnant servant with no proof of her own identity. No witnesses to contradict her brother's lies. Or she could stop running. Stop hiding. Stop pretending to be something she wasn't. Celeste slowly pushed herself upright, her hand pressed to her belly, her heart pounding with terrified determination. She could be Moonfire. The thought was almost too big to hold. For years, for her entire conscious life, she had been taught to suppress that part of herself, to bury it so deep that even she sometimes forgot it existed. Her mother had drilled it into her before she died. Never show them. Never let anyone see. The power will get you killed. But the power was the only thing that might save her now. Celeste closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, past the layers of fear and suppression and carefully constructed walls, reaching for the silver light that had always burned at her core. It was faint. Gods. It was so faint. Barely a flicker after years of starvation and abuse. But it was there. It was still there. Come back to me, she whispered to it. Please. I need you now. The light stirred. Outside, she heard voices rising, Victor's honeyed tones and another voice, deeper, rougher, edged with barely contained fury. Corvus. He was arguing, defending her, putting himself between her and the brother who wanted to sell her child. And as she felt the bond between them thrumming with his protective fury, something inside her responded, the bond pulling at that slumbering power, waking it from its long hibernation, inviting it to rise. She couldn't let him fight this battle alone. Celeste rose to her feet, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the tent flap. The morning air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp and thick with the scent of too many wolves. She could see them gathered near the central fire, Victor in his expensive traveling furs, surrounded by a contingent of guards bearing the nightshade colors, facing off against Corvus and a cluster of soldiers whose hands rested on their weapons. Victor saw her first. His face lit up with that familiar false concern, his arms spreading wide as if to embrace her. Celeste, thank the gods you're safe. I've been so worried. We all have. Don't touch me. Her voice came out stronger than she expected, cutting through his performance like a blade. Victor stopped, his expression flickering with the first hint of genuine emotion, annoyance, quickly suppressed. Sister, please, you're clearly not yourself. This delusion of yours, these fantasies about being mistreated. I said don't touch me. She stepped forward, putting herself beside Corvus, feeling the warmth of his body and the steadiness of his presence. He glanced at her, a flash of concern, of warning, but didn't try to send her back. Instead, his hand found the small of her back, a silent gesture of support. Victor's eyes tracked the movement. Something dark flickered in their depths. I see, he said softly. You found yourself a protector. How quaint. He turned to the gathered soldiers, raising his voice so all could hear. Gentlemen, I apologize for this scene. My sister has clearly been filling your heads with stories, painting herself as a victim when she is simply a troubled woman in need of care. I have documentation here. He produced a sheaf of papers from his coat, official-looking documents covered in seals and signatures, establishing my legal guardianship over her person and any children she might produce. These contracts date back to our father's time, signed when Celeste was given to me as household staff in exchange for the family debts. She is, I'm afraid, technically, my property. A murmur ran through the watching soldiers. Celeste saw their faces shifting, doubt creeping in where solidarity had been just moments before. Victor was good, so terrifyingly good at this, and she could feel the tide beginning to turn against her. "Those documents are forgeries," she said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "They bear the seal of the Eastern Province Magistrate." Victor's smile never wavered. "I'm happy to submit them to any legal authority for verification. In the meantime, I simply ask that my sister be returned to my custody, for her own safety and the safety of her unborn child." "She's not going anywhere." Corvus's voice was flat, final, dangerous. The soldiers around them shifted uneasily, recognizing the tone of a man about to commit violence. Victor's smile finally slipped. "I'm sorry, but who exactly are you to make that decision? A common soldier? My documents are legal and binding, unless you're claiming some higher authority that supersedes provincial law." "As a matter of fact," Corvus said slowly, "I am." He reached up to his collar and did something Celeste couldn't quite see, unfastened a clasp, pulled at a hidden seam, and suddenly the plain traveling cloak fell away to reveal what had been hidden beneath. Not the simple uniform of a common soldier. Armor. Black and silver armor, inscribed with runes that glowed faintly in the morning light. And on his chest, worked in threads of pure moonlight, a crest that knocked the breath from Celeste's lungs. The royal crest. The mark of the Alpha King. "My name," Corvus said, his voice resonating with power that made every wolf in the clearing drop to their knees, "is not Blackwood. It never was. I am Corvus Blackmoon, Alpha King of the Southern Territories, and the woman you're claiming as property is my mate." The silence that followed was absolute. Celeste stared at him, at this man she thought she knew, this soldier who had brought her food and told her stories and held her while she cried, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The Alpha King. Her mate was the Alpha King. Victor recovered first, but she could see the fear in his eyes now, barely hidden beneath a veneer of servile respect. "Your Majesty, I had no idea. If I had known she was your, my mate, my Luna, the future mother of my heirs." Corvus stepped forward, and Victor stumbled back. "And you came here with forged documents, trying to claim her as property, trying to take her from me." "The documents aren't forged, Your Majesty, I swear it. The contracts are entirely legitimate. I don't care if they were written by the gods themselves." Corvus's voice dropped to a growl that made the air vibrate. "She is mine. The pup she carries is mine. No contract, no law. No force in this world supersedes a mate bond. You know this." Victor's mask cracked further. Celeste could see the calculation behind his eyes, the desperate scramble for some angle, some leverage, some way to salvage this situation. "Of course, Your Majesty. Of course. I would never dream of interfering with a mate bond." He spread his hands, all false contrition. "I simply didn't realize. I only wanted to ensure my sister's safety, if I had known she was claimed by someone of your stature." "But you didn't know?" Corvus tilted his head, studying Victor like a wolf studying prey. "Which means you came here intending to take a pregnant woman away from the encampment where she'd sought refuge. You came with legal documents to enforce servitude contracts. You came to claim ownership of her and her unborn child." He stepped closer, and Victor's guards, those loyal nightshade wolves who had seemed so intimidating moments ago, scrambled to get out of his way. "Tell me," Corvus said softly, "why exactly was a woman carrying your family's bloodline sold into servitude in the first place? And why was her unborn child so valuable that you tracked her across 3 provinces in the dead of winter?" Victor's face went white. I... You didn't know, did you?" Celeste heard herself say. Her voice was strange to her own ears, stronger, steadier, as if the last tremor of fear had finally gone quiet. "You didn't know who he was? You thought you could walk in here with your fake documents and your lies and take me back. You thought no one would stop you. Celeste, please, don't call me that. She stepped forward and power stirred in her belly. Not the pup, but something older, something silver and fierce and finally ready to wake. Don't call me your sister. Don't call me property. Don't call me anything at all. Her hands were glowing. She looked down at them, distantly surprised, and watched silver light pulse beneath her skin like liquid moonfire. It didn't hurt. It felt like coming home, like breathing after drowning, like stepping into sunlight after years in the dark. Victor stared at her hands, and the fear in his eyes transformed into something else. Hunger. Desperate, greedy hunger. The moonfire power, he breathed. You've actually manifested it. I knew you would eventually. I always knew. You knew. Celeste's voice was ice. You knew what I was. You knew the whole time. That's why you kept me. That's why you sold me into servitude instead of killing me outright. You were waiting for this. The bloodline is worth a fortune, Victor said, all pretense finally stripped away. Do you have any idea what collectors will pay for verified Moonfire heritage? The breeding contracts alone? He stopped. He looked at Corvus. He looked at the soldiers, the watching wolves, the witnesses to his confession. He realized what he had just admitted. Your Majesty, he said quickly. I didn't mean... I was speaking hypothetically. You were speaking about selling my mate and my heir like livestock. Corvus's eyes blazed gold, his wolf rising to the surface with a fury that made the air itself feel thick and dangerous. You were speaking about breeding contracts, about treating a woman of royal blood, my Luna, my queen, as property to be bought and sold. He drew his sword. I think, Corvus said, we're done talking. Victor screamed for his guards. One of them, a scarred veteran with nightshade colors on his shoulder, actually stepped forward, sword half drawn, loyalty overriding sense for a single brave, stupid moment. Corvus didn't even look at him. He simply let his dominance unfurl, the full crushing weight of an Alpha King's authority pressing down on the clearing like a physical force, and the veteran's knees buckled. His sword clattered to the snow, and then he was running, the rest of Victor's guards scattering into the forest behind him. Corvus advanced, and Victor stumbled backward, falling to his knees in the snow. Please, he begged. Please, Your Majesty, I'll do anything. Wait. Celeste's voice cut through the chaos. Corvus stopped, his sword raised, his eyes still burning with deadly intent. She walked forward, her steps steady despite the pounding of her heart, and looked down at the brother who had tormented her for most of her life. He stared back up at her with the same eyes their mother had, gray as winter storms, framed by the same dark lashes, and she felt something twist in her chest. Not grief. Not anymore. Something sharper, colder, more final. He's mine to deal with, she said quietly. Corvus hesitated. Celeste? He's been mine for years. She met his eyes, and she saw the moment he understood. Every scar, every nightmare, every moment I spent believing I was worthless. He gave me all of that. And now, I need to take it back. Slowly, the Alpha King lowered his sword. Whatever you decide, he said, I will support. Celeste nodded. She turned back to Victor, and she began to glow. The silver light poured from Celeste's hands like liquid moonfire, spreading up her arms and across her chest until her entire body pulsed with it. The power she had suppressed for so long, the power Victor had tried to sell, had planned to breed out of her like she was nothing more than a vessel for rare genetics, finally answered her call. And it was furious. Victor scrambled backward through the snow, his eyes wide with a terror that Celeste had never seen on his face before. He had always been the one to inspire fear, the one who held power over others. Now he was the one cowering, and the reversal made something dark and satisfied unfurl in Celeste's chest. "You can't do this," he gasped. "The moonfire power, it doesn't work like that. It's supposed to be passive, defensive. You're not supposed to be able to— I'm not supposed to do a lot of things." Celeste advanced on him, her bare feet leaving prints of silver light in the snow. "I wasn't supposed to survive Mother's death. I wasn't supposed to endure your cruelty. I wasn't supposed to escape, or find my mate, or finally understand what I am." She lifted one glowing hand, and Victor flinched as if she had struck him. "But here I am, Victor, doing all the things I wasn't supposed to do." He lunged at her. It happened so fast that Celeste barely had time to react. Victor's hand closed around her throat, his desperation giving him a surge of strength that his terror should have stolen. His fingers dug into her windpipe, cutting off her air. And for one horrible moment she was back in the Nightshade Manor, being punished for some imagined slight, her brother's hand around her neck, while he explained exactly how worthless she was. But she wasn't that girl anymore. The silver light flared brighter, and Celeste felt it respond to her fear, her rage, her desperate need to protect herself, and the life growing inside her. The power surged outward in a shield of pure moonfire, slamming into Victor with enough force to send him flying backward through the air. He crashed into a snowdrift 20 feet away, and when he tried to rise, he found he couldn't. Celeste walked toward him, her power humming in her veins like a song she was only just learning to sing. She could feel it now, the full scope of what the Moonfire bloodline could do. It wasn't just defensive, wasn't just passive. It was a gift from the moon goddess herself, a legacy of protection and judgment and fierce, terrible love. And right now, it was holding Victor pinned to the ground with bands of silver light that tightened every time he struggled. "You were always afraid of me," Celeste said quietly, standing over him. "That's why you hated me so much. That's why you sold me instead of killing me. You knew what I could become, and you needed to keep me broken so I'd never realize it." Victor snarled up at her, all pretense of charm stripped away. "You were worthless, a burden. Mother's precious little miracle who couldn't even shift properly. I should have smothered you in your cradle. But you didn't." Celeste tilted her head, studying him the way Corvus had studied him earlier. "Like prey that wasn't worth the effort of killing. Because even then you knew my blood was valuable. Even then you were calculating how to profit from me." She crouched down, bringing her glowing face close to his. "Tell me, Victor, how does it feel to know that everything you tried to steal from me is now completely beyond your reach?" He spat at her. The saliva sizzled against the shield of silver light surrounding her, evaporating before it could touch her skin. Celeste didn't flinch. She simply looked at her brother, really looked at him, and felt the last threads of whatever had bound her to him finally, completely snap. "I could kill you," she said. "The power wants me to. It remembers what you did to our mother, Victor. How you let her fade away in that cold room while you stripped the manor of everything valuable. How you told everyone she died of grief, when really she died of neglect." Victor's face went white. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Celeste's voice was ice and moonlight, ancient and terrible. "I sat with her while she died. I held her hand while she whispered about the daughter she was leaving behind, the daughter who carried the last of the Moonfire blood. She told me to hide, Victor, to survive, because she knew what you would do if you ever understood what I was worth." The silver light around Victor tightened, and he screamed. Celeste stood, looking down at the brother who had shaped so much of her pain. She could feel Corvus behind her, feel his presence like warmth against her back, but he didn't interfere. He had promised to support her choice, and he was keeping that promise, even as his wolf surely howled for blood. "I spent years believing I deserved what you did to me," she said. "Years believing I was worthless, broken, a burden to everyone around me. You made me believe that, Victor. You carve those lies into my soul with every blow, every insult, every moment of calculated cruelty. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, stronger, clearer, ringing with an authority she had never allowed herself to claim. I name you Victor Nightshade, betrayer of blood, seller of kin. I invoke the ancient right of House Moonfire to strip you of name and pack, to cast you out from all territories where wolves hold sway, to mark you as Oathbreaker until the end of your days. Victor's eyes went wide with genuine terror. No, no, you can't. Only the head of a royal house can invoke that right. I am Celeste Moonfire. The words rang across the clearing like bells. Last daughter of the Silver Dynasty, keeper of the moon's fire, and the rightful head of House Moonfire. My blood is pure, my claim is true, and my judgment is final. She turned to Corvus, and the love in his eyes made her heart ache with fierce, impossible joy. Alpha King, I request that pack justice be rendered, not blood vengeance. I will not become the thing he tried to make me, but I ask that Victor Nightshade be exiled to the Shadowlands, stripped of name and pack, his tongue marked with the symbol of his treachery, so that all who meet him will know what he has done. Corvus stepped forward, his sword still in his hand. He looked at Victor, who was whimpering now, all his arrogance shattered by the weight of what was about to happen. You tried to sell my mate, Corvus said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. You tried to sell my heir. You admitted, in front of witnesses, that you knew of her heritage and planned to profit from it through breeding contracts and collectors' sales. His lip curled in disgust. There is no punishment cruel enough for what you attempted. But my Luna has asked for mercy instead of blood, and I will honor her request. He nodded to his soldiers, and two of them stepped forward with a branding iron that glowed with runes of ancient power. Victor screamed and struggled, but Celeste's silver bonds held him fast. Victor Nightshade, Corvus declared, you are hereby exiled to the Shadowlands for the remainder of your natural life. You are stripped of your pack name, stripped of your family name, stripped of all rights and recognitions that wolves hold sacred. Your tongue will be marked with the traitor's brand, so that any wolf who hears you speak will know you for what you are. The brand pressed against Victor's tongue, and his scream echoed through the frozen forest. When it was done, when the soldiers dragged his limp body toward the edge of camp to begin his journey into exile, Celeste felt something finally settle in her chest. It was over. Victor was gone, and he would never hurt her again. The child in her belly was safe. The future she had never allowed herself to imagine was suddenly, impossibly real. She swayed, and Corvus caught her. I've got you, he murmured against her hair. I've got you, my love. It's over. He's gone. The silver light faded from her skin as she sagged against him, exhaustion replacing the fierce power that had sustained her through the confrontation. She felt wrung out, hollow, like a vessel that had been emptied of everything it contained, but also strangely light, as if a weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. Take me somewhere quiet, she whispered. Please. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest as he carried her through the parting crowd of soldiers. She heard their murmurs, Luna, Queen, Moonfire. But she was too tired to process what any of it meant. All she knew was the steady beat of Corvus's heart beneath her ear, the warmth of his arms around her, the warm, wild scent of him filling her lungs with every breath. His tent was warm, lit by the soft glow of banked coals. He laid her down on the furs with infinite gentleness, then stretched out beside her, pulling her close until she was tucked against his chest with his arms wrapped around her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You were magnificent, Corvus finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Standing there with moonfire pouring from your skin, claiming your birthright. demanding justice. I have never seen anything so beautiful in my entire life. Celeste laughed, a small, exhausted sound. I felt like I was about to collapse the entire time. You didn't show it. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You stood there like a queen, Celeste, like the Luna you were always meant to be. Luna. The word sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. She tilted her head back to look at him, searching his face in the dim light. Is that what I am now? She asked quietly. You're Luna. You've been my Luna since the moment I first saw you. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. But we haven't. I haven't. He took a shaky breath, and she realized with wonder that the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in all the territories, was nervous. Celeste, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that whatever you answer, it won't change how I feel about you. Nothing could change that. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Ask me. The mate bond between us, it's complete in every way that matters. But wolves have a tradition, a way of claiming each other that goes beyond the bond itself. His eyes were gold now, his wolf rising to the surface, but his voice remained gentle. The marking bite. When mates exchange bites, it creates a connection that can never be broken. A permanent link between our wolves, our souls, our very essences. Celeste's breath caught. She had heard of marking bites, of course. Every wolf knew about them. But she had never imagined she would be offered one. Had never imagined anyone would want to bind themselves to her so permanently, so irrevocably. I'm asking if you'll let me mark you, Corvus continued, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. And if you'll mark me in return. I want to belong to you, Celeste, not just as your mate, but as your claimed partner, your equal, your king, if you'll have me. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and sudden. You want me to mark you? But I was a servant. I'm carrying a child that isn't. The child is mine. His voice was fierce now, brooking no argument. The moment you became my mate, everything that was yours became mine as well, including our pup. I will raise that child as my own, love that child as my own, fight for that child as my own. There is no distinction between the baby in your belly and any children we might have together in the future. They are all ours. Do you understand? She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. So, I'm asking you again. He took her hand and pressed it over his heart, where she could feel it hammering against his ribs. Will you mark me, Celeste Moonfire? Will you claim me as completely as I want to claim you? The word came out as barely more than a breath. Yes. Something shifted in Corvus's eyes, a flash of pure, primal hunger that made heat pool low in Celeste's belly. He moved over her slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to pull away if she wanted to. But she didn't want to. She wanted this. She wanted him. She wanted the forever that the marking bite would give them. He kissed her first, deep and slow, with a reverence that made her ache. His hands traced the curves of her body through the fabric of her dress, learning her shape, memorizing every dip and swell. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were completely gold, his wolf fully at the surface. I'm going to bare your neck now, he said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through her entire body. Tell me if you need me to stop. She tilted her head back in answer, exposing the vulnerable column of her throat. Corvus made a sound that was more growl than moan. He pressed his face to the curve of her neck, breathing her in, and she felt his teeth graze her skin, a gentle scrape that sent electricity shooting down her spine. Mine, he growled against her flesh. My mate, my Luna, my queen. Then he bit. The pain was sharp and bright, his fangs piercing the junction of her neck and shoulder with a precision that spoke of instinct older than civilization. Celeste gasped, her body arching against his, her hands fisting in his hair as sensation flooded through her. Pain, yes, but transforming almost instantly into something else. Pleasure, heat. A cascading wave of warmth that started at the bite and spread through every nerve ending in her body until she was drowning in it. And then the bond opened. It was like nothing she had ever experienced, feeling Corvus's emotions pour into her, mixing with her own until she couldn't tell where she ended and he began. She felt his love for her, fierce and consuming, a devotion so complete that it stole her breath. She felt his protectiveness, his fear at the thought of ever losing her, his joy at finally being able to claim her as his own. She felt his wolf, pressing against her consciousness with a warmth that made her own wolf howl in response. Everything he was, everything he felt, everything he had ever been, it was hers now. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that everything she was had just become his. When he finally lifted his head, his lips were stained with her blood, but his eyes were gentle, almost reverent, as he looked down at her. "Your turn," he whispered. "Claim me, Celeste. Make me yours." Her wolf surged forward with a need that overwhelmed everything else. She rose up, wrapping her arms around his neck, and pressed her mouth to the junction of his shoulder and throat. She could feel his pulse hammering beneath her lips, could smell the scent of him, pine and lightning and something that was purely, undeniably his, intensified 100-fold by the open bond between them. She bit. The taste of his blood flooded her mouth, rich and wild, like forest and power and home. She felt him shudder against her, heard him moan her name, felt the bond between them flare even brighter as the claiming became mutual. Her wolf howled in triumph, and somewhere in the distance she could have sworn she heard an answering howl from his. When she pulled back, licking the wound closed with instinct she didn't know she had, Corvus was staring at her with an expression so raw and open that it undid her completely. "Mine," she whispered, echoing his earlier words. "My mate, my alpha, my king." "Yours?" he answered, pulling her close until they were pressed together from chest to hip. "Mate." They breathed the word together as the bond settled into place, a golden thread connecting their souls, permanent and unbreakable. Celeste could feel it humming beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the connection they now shared. She would never be alone again, never be abandoned, never be made to feel worthless or broken or unloved. She was claimed, and she had claimed in return. Corvus held her through the night, whispering endearments against her hair, running his hands over the curve of her belly where their child grew. She slept deeper than she had in years, secure in the knowledge that the man beside her would never let anything hurt her again. When morning came, they faced the gathered soldiers together. Corvus stood with Celeste at his side, their matching marks visible above the collars of their clothing. The pack saw. The pack understood. A murmur ran through the crowd. Luna, their Luna, marked and claimed. And then, one by one, the wolves began to kneel. "I present to you," Corvus said, his voice ringing across the encampment, "Celeste Moonfire, Luna Queen of the Southern Territories and last daughter of the Silver Dynasty. The mate bond between us has been claimed and marked. Any wolf who offers her insult offers me insult. Any wolf who threatens her threatens me. She is my equal in all things, and her word carries the same weight as my own." The kneeling wolves lowered their heads in acknowledgement. Celeste felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were tears of joy, of disbelief, of a happiness so vast she couldn't quite contain it. This was real. This was her life now. In the weeks that followed, word spread across the territories. The Alpha King had taken a mate, a woman of the Moonfire bloodline, thought to be extinct. The last daughter of a royal house was now Luna Queen, and she carried an heir who would unite two ancient lineages. Corvus purchased the Nightshade lands, as he had promised, but he didn't keep them for himself. Instead, he gifted them to Celeste, signing the deed over with a flourish and a kiss. "What am I supposed to do with an estate?" she asked, bewildered, staring at the papers in her hands. "Whatever you want." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Turn it into a sanctuary, a refuge, a place where wolves who have been sold or abandoned or broken can come to heal." She turned in his arms, searching his face. "You'd let me do that?" "I'd help you do it." He kissed her forehead. "Every wolf deserves to know they have value, Celeste, that they're more than their bloodline or their pack status or the cruelties others have inflicted on them. You survived things that would have destroyed anyone else. Now you can use that survival to help others do the same." The sanctuary opened 3 months later, just as Celeste's belly grew round with their child. She named it Moonfire Haven, and wolves began arriving almost immediately. Omega without packs, lone wolves without territories, the abandoned and the betrayed and the ones who had given up hope. Celeste welcomed them all. On the day their daughter was born, a squalling, silver-eyed girl with Corvus's dark hair and her mother's moonfire blood, Celeste stood on the sanctuary's balcony and watched the sun rise over the lands that had once belonged to her tormentors. Corvus joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on the soft curve of her belly where the evidence of their daughter's birth still showed. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against her ear. Celeste leaned back into his warmth, feeling the bond pulse between them with steady, golden light. Through it, she felt his love, his contentment, his fierce, protective joy. Through it, she knew that everything they had built together was real and permanent and utterly unshakable. "I'm thinking," she said softly, "that I spent so many years believing I was worthless, believing I deserved the cruelty I endured, believing that happiness like this was for other people, not for wolves like me." His arms tightened around her. "And now?" She smiled, watching the sunlight paint the snow-covered grounds in shades of rose and gold. In the nursery behind them, their daughter made a soft, contented sound in her sleep. Around them, the sanctuary stirred to life, wolves who had been broken now learning to heal, finding hope in the same place where Celeste had once suffered. "Now I know the truth," she said. "I was never worthless, Corvus. I was never broken. I was just waiting for the right moment, the right place, the right mate to help me see what I really was." She turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "I was waiting," she whispered against his lips, "for you." He kissed her back with all the passion and tenderness and consuming love that flowed between them through the bond. When they finally broke apart, his eyes were shining with emotion. "And I was waiting for you," he said. "My mate, my Luna, my heart." Below them, wolves emerged from the sanctuary to greet the new day. Above them, the last stars faded as dawn claimed the sky, and between them, a bond hummed with golden light, permanent, unbreakable, and eternally, impossibly bright. They had found each other against all odds. They had claimed each other in the old way, marking their souls as surely as they had marked their skin. And they had built something beautiful from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy them. Celeste Moonfire, once a servant and a slave and a girl with no value, was now a Luna Queen with a mate who adored her, a daughter who carried the promise of the future, and a sanctuary full of wolves who looked to her as proof that broken things could be made whole again. It was more than she had ever dreamed. It was exactly what she deserved. And it was only the beginning.